we heard and saw the air defenses trying to engage something that was coming in. Now, we heard a series of explosions, but importantly, what we did see what looked like an impact and a fireball going up into the sky. And also in the last hour, we heard what sounded like a projectile, like a missile flying overhead, followed by a loud thud. Now, the Kurdish regional security say that they shot down early in the last few hours an unidentified drone near the airport. Now, the airport is particularly sensitive because it hosts Kurdish forces as well as a base used by the United States forces. Now, the Iraqi Popular Mobilization Force linked to Iran, that they say that they targeted a US base inside the airport. Now, there's been no official confirmation of that, but what I can tell you is earlier when we were driving around, we saw a considerable amount of smoke coming from that airport. And as I said, we've just seen in the last few moments the air defense is trying to shoot down something, whether it's a drone or missile, but also we did witness an impact. Now, elsewhere in the country that you've just mentioned, there's been airstrikes targeting the Popular Mobilization Forces linked to Iran in Mosul, and a source has told Al Jazeera one person was killed and 2 people injured, and that just highlights just how volatile the situation is here in northern Iraq and how this conflict is being played out on Iraqi territory.
It is just past 18:30 GMT. You're watching Al Jazeera's extensive coverage of the conflict between the US, Israel and Iran. I'm Nick Clark. One person has been killed in Dubai as Iran launched a new wave of attacks on Gulf nations. The UAE says it's been under attack from missiles and drones. Debris from a missile interception has caused damage to Dubai's Marina Tower. US bases in Bahrain have also been targeted, and interceptions have been seen over Qatar. Ali Laranjani, the Secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, says Donald Trump has failed to meet his aims and that other countries in the region are now aware the United States cannot keep them secure. Abbas Araghchi has addressed the President Masoud Pezeshkian's comments from earlier on Saturday, in which he suggested attacks on Gulf countries may be scaled back. In a social media post, Araghchi says President Pezeshkian's openness to de-escalation within our region, provided that our neighbours' airspace, territory and waters are not used to attack the Iranian people, was almost immediately killed by President Trump's misinterpretation of our capabilities, determination and intent. If Mr. Trump seeks escalation, it's precisely what our powerful armed forces have long been prepared for and what he will get. Responsibility for any intensification of Iran's exercise of self-defense will lie squarely with the US administration, he said. The spokesman for the Central Command of Iran's army, the Khatam al-Anbiya, has also given a statement on what Tehran considers a legitimate target.
The countries that are providing offensive capabilities to the Americans and to the Zionist entities have not been targeted by us. However, the military bases from which the strikes on Iran originated, we targeted them and destroyed them. We targeted them from the land and from the sea. I openly say that we destroyed them totally, and we are prepared to direct heavy blows to any entity from which assaults originate. If the destroyed military installations are restored, we will target them once again and we will destroy it.
Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has threatened to expand the military assault on Iran to include more targets and people. Speaking at a meeting of Latin American leaders in Florida, the president continued to describe the strikes as a success. In Lebanon, Iran has announced it's evacuating all of its embassy staff and their families. And areas across Iran have been struck by US and Israeli warplanes on Saturday. Iran accuses the US of damaging a desalination plant in the south, a vital resource for an area short on fresh water supplies. So let's turn now to our US correspondent. Mike Hanna is at the White House. But first, let's go to Heidi Jo Castro, who's at Dover Air Force Base in Delaware, where Donald Trump is on hand for the arrival of 6 service members who have been killed in the Iran war. So tell us, first of all, Heidi, if you would, what we're expecting, what's the plan of action there?
That's right. President Trump is already here on the base. This will be the first time that he's present for a dignified transfer of remains of U.S. service members killed overseas in a theater of operation while in his second term. And it's also notable, this is the first time he'll be receiving the bodies of killed U.S. soldiers from a conflict that he launched. At this moment, he's meeting with the family members of those 6 Army reservists who were killed in that Iranian drone strike on their office in Kuwait. And it's not just Trump who's meeting with them. This really underscores how much this administration wants to project now to a very skeptical American audience just how seriously they are taking these U.S. military deaths, because joining Trump is also the First Lady, as well as his Vice President, the Second Lady, and then a long list of cabinet members and the commander of the Joint Chiefs, as well as even Steve Witkoff, the special envoy to the Middle East. They are meeting now behind closed doors with those family members, remembering the service and sacrifice of those 6 Army reservists who range from age 20, a college student in Des Moines who was killed, a mother of 2 from Minnesota, a mechanic, a martial arts expert, all of these people being remembered here and by the American public and by President Trump calling them heroes. But I have to remind everyone that this is sort of a recasting that the president has undertaken. During his first term in office, he was widely criticized for remarks calling U.S. soldiers who died in combat losers, and also having not been drafted to the Vietnam War, having 5 draft deferments when he was a young man. All of that, he has flipped the picture, now calling himself the biggest supporter of the U.S. military, taking credit, he says, for rebuilding the military, and now in these somber moments standing side by side with those families that have made the ultimate sacrifice.
Okay, let's head to the White House. Mike Hanna's there. So, Mike, Donald Trump in Delaware, as you've just been hearing, awaiting the repatriation of the bodies of those killed. But earlier he was speaking and heralding the success of the U.S. and Israeli attacks in Iran and how they're going to be ramped up indeed.
Yes, indeed. Well, he was speaking to a gathering of his Latin American allies, but uttered comments that he'd made earlier in the day on his social media page in the early hours of the morning, in which he cast Iran's apology at that time to their Gulf neighbors as a surrender by Iran, and saying they'd been forced into the surrender by the actions of the U.S. and its Israeli allies. However, President Trump insisting that there may be a ramping up of operations, or giving that implication, because he said that there are areas and groups of people, as he put it, who were not on the initial target list, who will now be on the target list. This implies that there's going to be an escalation of U.S. operations within Iran into different areas, perhaps, or against different groups. Now, we know the long list of targets that have already been attacked by U.S. forces, but now President Trump appears to be implying that there are other targets that are now going to be added. What these targets are, we don't know. But what we do know is the president is threatening an escalation and expansion of U.S. operations in Iran.
And Heidi, as we await the transfer of the bodies to take place, I'm wondering what's the general view across the United States about Trump's war in Iran and the popularity or not of it?
Right, it is unpopular. The polls from Reuters that came prior to these 6 service members being announced killed, even then, only 1 in 4 Americans supported Trump's decision to take these strikes. We're still waiting on more updated national polling numbers. But talking to people, especially going to counties that voted for Trump, like we did a few days ago, people were widely skeptical, especially given the MAGA base, the Make America Great Again base, who supported Trump in what he said was the America First doctrine, and not trying to get the U.S. involved in more foreign conflicts abroad, especially ones that are as open-ended as this conflict with Iran seems to be becoming. A lot of people expressing skepticism, though it's important to point out that among Republican voters in the U.S., still the majority say they support Trump's actions in Iran, but among Democrats and among independents, who really are the ones that shape how election turns out, they're the tiebreakers in the U.S., they are widely skeptical of this war in Iran. And the images that we are waiting to see now of those 6 U.S. service members in their coffins being transported from the plane and to the mortuary here on Dover Air Force Base, it's those images that are the most damaging to Trump's campaign before the American people to continue waging this war.
And Mike, what about international relations for the US president? Because a lot of relationships are being strained, not least between the United States and Gulf nations who suddenly find themselves in the firing line of what effectively is his and Israel's war. How is he managing those relationships with the Gulf allies?
Well, in his first term and during his second as well, President Trump has carefully cultured relations with his Gulf allies, this on both a personal basis as well as a contractual one. There's been economic deals, there's been all sorts of interaction between President Trump and his allies in the Gulf. Publicly, those Gulf administrations have not yet publicly criticized President Trump for his decision to go into the war. Their reaction has generally been muted. The White House, for its part, the press secretary says that President Trump is in close contact with all our regional partners, and the terrorist Iranian regime's attacks on its neighbors prove how imperative it was for President Trump to eliminate this threat to our country and to our allies. So projecting there that there is still American protection for the Gulf allies, but privately, and some who are not in government but have close ties to the Gulf governments have been critical of President Trump. One notable comment came from the former Saudi intelligence chief, Prince Turki al-Faisal, who said this is Netanyahu's war. He somehow persuaded President Trump to support his views. So there is that criticism among many Gulf circles. However, formally and publicly, Gulf governments have not come out in any open criticism of President Trump's actions.
All right, Mike Hanna at the White House, Heidi Jo Castro in Delaware. Thank you very much for that. OK, let's bring in Ross Harrison, who's a senior fellow with the Middle East Institute and also the author of the book Decoding Iran's Foreign Policy. Joins us now from Washington, D.C. Ross, if I could just start with what we're waiting for, what's about to happen there at Dover Air Force Base in Delaware and the repatriation of the bodies. What about the optics of that? What's your view and how difficult or not that is for Donald Trump in a war that he's never really given any real direction for?
Well, I think it's obviously a somber moment for the United States and for the families of these fallen soldiers. And I think there's going to be a certain support for the families and sort of an embrace of the families. But I think it's going to raise bigger questions because this war is only 1 week in at this point, and this is not likely to be the last casualty. We hope it will be, but it's unlikely to be the last casualty. And there's casualties in Israel, and there's casualties taking place in our Gulf Arab allies. And obviously, the biggest burden that has been shouldered has been from the Iranian people. Lots of casualties there. So I think this is not going to play well over time. The longer this conflict is protracted, the longer conflict goes on, the more likely there's going to be some kind of bad taste in the mouth of the American people. Particularly about a president who promised no further forever wars.
Absolutely. This war, a long time in the planning, one assumes. Do you think they took account of the fact that Iran would react in the way that they have, especially bringing regional neighbors into the firing line, Gulf countries particularly?
Nick, it's really hard. It's really hard to know how much planning went into because normally we have some visibility. In a regular administration, we would have visibility as to how these decisions were made because they would be made with consultation across the U.S. government. The White House is taking counsel from a relatively short list of people, and so we really don't know what they expected. I can tell you that someone who has looked at Iran's foreign policy over the last 5 to 10 years, we should have expected it because if you think about Iran's previous strategy before October 7th of 2023, when Hamas attacked Israel and then this whole series of events unfolded, the thing that Iran was doing was they were basically creating a target outside their own country. They were combating Israel and the United States, not directly, which is what happened, which is what's happening now. They were attacking them indirectly, creating deterrence through their alliance with Hezbollah, Hamas, the Hashd al-Shaabi in Iraq,